every time I think of sticky notes, I was thinking to myself, what's something I could take? And then everything's got exactly. Yeah, that's what I've done too. Should you take the time, even the year? Should I put a sticky note next to the other one and say, please reconsider? Like,
All right, everybody. I have good news, followed by more gooder news. After I got bad news, and some of you probably aren't going to be able to take it, but you're just going to have to deal with it.
oh yeah, we gotta wait June 6th. I thought that's July 6th. It's July 6th. That's the date, July 6th. Is it? I thought that was yes. For the AP test scores.
Yeah, that sounds about right. I think it's right after the 4th of July. I think you're right.
Something.
That's what some college.
You know, for a while there, they tried to charge people to get it 2 days early. Scout, isn't that just kind of scummy?
Already paid for the test.
I know.
If I
I mean, they only did it. I think they did it like 1 year or 2 years. I remember, like, you've got to be kidding. That's just horrible.
yeah. Second.
All right. I know we're on the bells today, but that's good news for all of you. We are going to have a final next week. 80 multiple choice and matching questions. That's true. There'll be 80. Most of them you'll be able to get bang, 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 most are incredibly basic questions. Don't incredibly basic. I'm not kidding. And then there'll be 4 short IDs. The short IDs I have put the possible topics, a list of them on Teams, and there will be one October 27th, 1962. The events around the Cuban Missile Crisis that nearly blew the world up. Then a bunch of other questions, and there'll be a couple from first semester, but the ones that we should all know very well, like Bacon's Rebellion. One of the most important events in history. Declaration of Independence, the Industrial Revolution. There'll be a couple of those for choices, but almost everything then will be basically from the 60s on, most of the time. And next. So we are going to watch a couple movies. Tomorrow we're going to watch What's Going On. So a movie about the music of the 1970s. There will be a worksheet that goes along with it, but it's very basic. Just put a phrase there. Just follow on, get a few things in. Yes.
We'll be on Teams.
Yeah, it'll be on Teams. I'll give you, if you're going to be gone, I'll give you the worksheet today. And give you a week, you know, to get it done. It's on Teams. It's really good. Yeah, I like a lot of music of the 70s. But, and there's What's Going On. Unbelievably great song by a guy named Marvin Gaye. Love that song. So that's what really fits in with the early 1970s. But then I got bad news. Some of you probably aren't going to really take this. So try to hold on to your emotions. I'm not going to do it. Calm down. It's okay. I'm not going to be here, but you'll be okay. I'll be back. Not block us out, but you know the routine with that. So, and I have second period completely schooled on how to move the film or the video on my computer to the screen. So hopefully everything goes fine for your class. But good stuff. I know who it is, so it can be very good. And so we're going to do a few notes today. I said I would tell some LBJ stories, but I'm going to wait another week. I told a bunch of stories yesterday. We just got a bunch of videos. There weren't that many people there because of the AP language. Yes. Good question. The presidents will be either June 2nd or 3rd. So in that last week of school, it's going to be all 47 presidents. And how much you list them? Alphabetically by height. Correct? In order of the presidents, Washington, I'll give you a hint. Washington will be number 1. 47, Trump. You got the rest is easy. Yeah, that's the easy part. Just to remind you, last name, unless they have the same last name, like there's a couple Johnsons, for example. You need the first name. And in order, just put them once. The only president you put more than once, Cleveland and Trump, because they serve non-consecutive terms. Let's say you forget one president. You have 47 lines and you forget Franklin Pierce. So you don't have the 14th president. And it messes up all your lines. I have no choice but to mark everyone. No, I will never do that. No, I'll just take 1 point off if you get one out of whack. If you get 2 mixed up, I'll just take a point off. That makes sense? Is that too nice? It's only going to be about 15% of your final grade. So you have 2 grades for your final. I'll put them both in the grade book, but I weigh one we do next week more. But you know, it will help. It still will be about 15%. So I'll make it like, oh, I got a B. I can still move my final grade up to an A and then do all the precedents. That's what I'm. All right. So let's get all the stuff I missed. I'm just going to go through a few highlights of it. And we got through, remember, just to review 68, I was hoping to get done with the election. I didn't make it. That's one thing about intervention time. I know it doesn't seem like much, but that means we lost, in net, that's 4 days. And, you know, there's always something else take days, but that's 4 days, and that's not even counting the short days with PLC. And I would have the 4 days, I would have been 80, you know, but I didn't quite make it. So I'm whining right now. Do you feel sorry for me? You, that's so insensitive. Come on, people. All right. So remember remember the 10 offensive. It was kind of a victory for it was a victory for the US and the United States, but people in the United States wanted out of the war then. Remember I showed you horrific pictures like this? Didn't look like victory. So the public lost faith. Robert Kennedy jumped into the race. Did we get to Nixon, the LBJ dropping out? Did we get to Martin Luther King being assassinated? Did we get to Kennedy being assassinated? Is that where we quit? We get to new Nixon? The what? Oh, that was it talking about 62. That was the stories about the Cuban Missile Crisis. Let's just start right here with the new Nixon. So the Republicans, Nixon, everyone thought his political career was done, but he was one of the hardest working, most determined men you'll ever see. And behind the scenes, he kept building up support. And by 68, he became the nominee. And this is actually the new Nixon. He tried the same thing in 1960. He's no longer the dirty trickster. He's the patriot. And he represented somebody who he tried to be somebody who would bring the country together because the Democrats were bitterly divided over the war. And he talked about the forgotten Americans, the great silent majority of Americans who were those not protesting the war, not protesting, not rioting like the civil rights, or like the women's rights movement who were going to destroy marriages and abandon their children. They were good, hardworking Americans, but it made that very clear. We're talking white Americans. And this has been trying to remake them up again. And it was working because there was a lot of resentment. A lot of working class Americans were upset with the anti-war movement, even if they didn't like the war. Working class Americans were not the ones who could go to college. They couldn't afford it. They couldn't go to college to get out of the draft. They didn't have political connections to get out of the draft. They didn't have friendly doctors who could find some kind of illness they could get out of the draft. They had to go. And while these rich, spoiled college kids, they could go off to college, not to worry about the draft, and then protest it. It just infuriated them. Nixon found a way to appeal to these people who were Democrats since Roosevelt and began to split up the Democratic coalition, and the Democrats never found a way to recover from this. They called this strategy, it was done by this man, Kevin Phillips, as the Southern strategy. And they talked about the social issues. Today we say culture wars. People don't know their place. And women demanding equal rights, destroying families. And all these hippies out there protesting the war. And drugs and crime was going up. He said law and order, but everybody knew that was racially tinged against the riots of Martin Luther King's assassination. He also said he'd bring peace with honor, but he didn't tell people what that meant. What it meant is pulling troops out, but continuing the bombing indefinitely to try to reinforce South Vietnam. Kevin Phillips, the guy who came up with the Southern strategy, summed it up in 1968. Nixon's Southern strategy, there's Phillips, and this is a quote from him. It's a very awkward way of saying, Negro folk is saying, whites who are afraid of black people and hate them. Did it work? Absolutely. It worked so well that it's hard to put into terms. today, or in every election, the majority of whites who vote according to exit polls vote Republican. So it has worked incredibly well. I should add, he had a guilt trip about it and felt really bad about how divisive this was and using race as a wedge issue and trying to rehabilitate his image in the 1990s. But who knows? It was really interesting how people deal with things like this. But then the Democrats split again. Just like 1948, George Wallace jumped into the race. He called his party the American Independent Party, but it was states' rights. Just like Strom Thurmond back in 48. And it was anti-civil rights. It also said using nuclear weapons against North Vietnam and bashing heads of hippies and those pointy-headed elites. But if you're not clear where George Wallace stood, here he is at a rally in '68 running for president. If you're not clear, if you can't really tell what side he's on, just think about it. I think that picture says 1,000 words. And Wallace ran. So the Democrats are split. But unlike Strom Thurmond, who became a Republican, Wallace actually was intensely racist. He did not deny that. But at the same time, liked the Great Society programs. He didn't like the Democratic Party completely. Interesting thing. But now the Democrats are split. All Nixon has to do is show up and not screw up, especially with the Democratic Convention in Chicago. I didn't put this down. I didn't put down Democrats. Put down the Democratic Convention. Turned into a disaster. Humphrey, the vice president, was going to get the nomination, but over 10,000 anti-war protesters. And this is not a good look when there's going to be over 5,000 National Guardsmen worried about protests with the welcome Democrats. It makes the Democrats look like they're in disarray. And the night Humphrey was nominated, there was an anti-war protest that over 10,000 protesters came, but over 15,000 police and National Guardsmen wade into the crowd. Here's the protest right here, and beat the hell out of the protesters. In fact, almost all of them took off their badges, put them in their pockets, and just went at it. Why'd they take their badges off? That's right, These are working class people who look at this, and they look at each of their school. They said, my kids are going off the board. I had to go off the board, and you're protesting. Which, of course, they didn't see it as they're protesting to end the war to get your kids home. But they didn't see it that way. And that showed how divisive the country was. And how divided it was, then more and more it became, even if they didn't like the war, we're going to win the war, called Hawks. And the anti-war protesters, anti-war became Dubs. And a lot of Hawks said they should have beat them all. They should have shot all. Later on, an investigation will look at it, they literally called it a police riot. But it makes the Democrats look like, which they were, in disarray. Absolute disarray. Divided over the war and civil rights. So Hubert Humphrey, the vice president, will run in. And he looked like he was going to get crushed. But then he made a switch, going against his president. At the end of September, he said, we need to come out. We have to have peace talks. We have to come together. And even though he is going to be, crowds will follow him, anti-war protesters chanting, dump the Humphrey. Overnight, it looked like he might win. He might win. It looked like Nixon was going to win in the landslide. We might get President Humphrey. And I can't even begin to imagine how the trajectory of the country would be different with Hubert Humphrey as president. I'm not saying good or bad, but it would have been radically different. But it got even more pro-Humphrey in October. That's why it's going to be called the October surprise, because it came out of nowhere. Lyndon Johnson announced in Paris, we might have a peace agreement in Vietnam. We might have peace, an agreement to pull out. And this made Humphrey's the vice president. It's going to help Humphrey. The war might be over. There's Lyndon Johnson in the executive conference room. We might win the war. And so Nixon, being Nixon, through a secret chain, we know this is 100% true, even though Nixon would deny it for his whole life. Because Lyndon Johnson's FBI had illegally been wiretapping Nixon's campaign Oh, the stuff that went on was so bad. Nixon secretly contacted the president of South Vietnam, President Tu. They secretly met with President Tu and they scuttled the peace accords. President Tu of South Vietnam pulled out of the accords. The peace conference died before the election, and Nixon didn't have to worry about that October surprise. There's President Tu right there, and Nixon could say peace with honor. I don't know if you've ever seen that symbol for peace before. That came from the anti-war movement, the anti-nuke movement. They called it in Britain in the 1950s. But so the war would rage on for another nearly 8 years. The United States would not fully get out until 1973. Almost half of the 58,000 American troops that would die in Vietnam would die after Nixon stuttered the peace. And over 2 million Vietnamese would die because Richard Nixon wanted to be elected president. So I'm biased. I can't help it. Everyone's biased. But there's only one president I'll tell you that I truly hate. Richard Nixon. I despise him for lots of reasons. But this is the biggie. Okay, I hate James Buchanan. And I hate Andrew Johnson. What the heck? I can go out with a few more. The president right before Lincoln, and then Lincoln's vice president. Yeah. All right. So, did it work? I found a map. The blue are Republicans, the red are Democrats. I should probably just accept it, those stupid publishing there say. But you can see how Wallace won. The election was razor thin. Nixon won. A few thousand votes differently in Illinois, Wisconsin, Ohio, just a few thousand, and Humphrey would have been elected president. It was that close. If Nixon would not have scuttled the peace, I have no doubt that Humphrey would have been elected president. And there would not be Watergate and the bitter distrust of the 1970s. Who knows what's going to happen? But Nixon came in and really tried to say a unified country. Here he is celebrating the election. I don't know what he's doing with that hand. But it's rare in American history there'll be a more divisive president than Richard Nixon. It'll be rare. He'll use the divides in the country for political gain. But he did have one big advantage. He just happened to be the president when the Apollo program reached its climax and landed a man on the moon. Apollo 11. Or at least that's what they want us to think, right? Yeah. We know. So, it is interesting about the Apollo program. You can imagine how unprecedented, the television audience, the interest in this, and then what happened? Everyone just didn't care after this. They canceled 3 flights to the moon. No one cared. It just wasn't that big of a deal. It's so weird. You're landing on the moon. I've been there. Whatever. Moving on. Just fascinating to me. So, a couple things that happened during Nixon's administration would really begin to pick up in the 1960s, but would really explode in the 1980s was environmentalism. And there was some major successes. For example, the Environmental Protection Agency would be signed by Nixon reluctantly in 1970. Now, this is a liberal economic program, so conservatives are opposed to this. And there was also Clean Air Act, Clean Water Act. And to give you an idea how bad it was in the 1970s, first off, I'll tell you from personal experience, early 1970s, driving down the interstate, the brand new interstate highway, and I can still vividly remember the median between the 2 lanes just filled with garbage. I don't mean like a little bit. No, I mean like knee high with garbage. People would just throw everything out the window. It was just. So as awful as the morons who litter the parking lot, it was so much worse. So much worse. But for the actual pollutants and what people were dumping in the water, it was unreal. This is outside Chicago. In fact, the southern part of Lake Michigan, the southern third, was covered most days of the year with 2 to 3 inches of foam by 1972 from all the chemicals in the water and killed everything in the lake. And now it is clean. In fact, you could even parts of it drink out of Lake Michigan and the other lakes where you couldn't do that. No way. Here is LA. Because of all the pollutants, mainly from cars, smog was so thick that most days of the year, you could not see 10 feet in front of you. Asthma cases went up dramatically. It dropped life expectancy in Los Angeles. It was just the norm. Everyone just talked about the smog. You had to cut through the smog. Today, it's gone. Why? Clean Air Act and the EPA enforcing it for reducing pollutants in cars. The big one was getting rid of lead. They put in gasoline to keep engines from knocking. Once they got rid of the lead, that made a huge difference. And now lead is completely banned from gasoline and in the 1980s. And so to give you an example about the lead consumption, I probably sucked in 10 to 15 times more lead when I was a little kid than you did. Just so much lead. So much lead. And I don't know if you know what lead does to little people. Do you know what it does to kids? And it's no coincidence that by the mid-1990s, all of a sudden you have less lead infected kids, and the crime rate began to drop. You're more violent with less controls when you have lead. By the way, don't forget that. Second down lead. Now I just do it for fun, but yeah, it's amazing how much lower crime is. Now, you can see a direct correlation with the drop in lead and the drop in crime. It was so much, there's so much more violent crime in the 80s. So it's not, and oh, I should add it's worldwide. It's a worldwide reduction. So it's really interesting. But back to this. This right here is a river. That's the Cuyahoga River. It's on fire. You know something is wrong when the Cuyahoga River burnt for 4 days. That's how much pollutant was in the air. So they had success, but this would all trigger a conservative revival. Environmental laws go completely against conservative economics, and every conservative president has reduced the size of the EPA. And so you're going to see a big reduction when we have like President Reagan, and then really big under George W. Bush, and then the EPA is basically gone. President Trump. The Clean Water Act is gone. So I'm not kidding about that. The Supreme Court has ruled there could be no more regulation of underground water. So that's just. So we'll see where that goes. I know what you're all thinking. Maybe the rich will start burning again. That could be fun. But if there are success, but this is a big part to get rid of the regulations, a major part of deregulation. The women's rights movement also began to pick up. You really notice it out of the anti-war movement. But a lot of women saw themselves just being used by the anti-war movement. And so they said, why are we fighting for rights for men? Well, we don't have our own rights. Don't forget Betty Friedan, the feminine mystique. Remember, we mentioned it before, where she said the call to domesticity, or the only chance for success in the call to domesticity is to become a housewife. And somehow the female mystique, that's all they need, because they're on this higher plane where they can't be tainted by the real life. And she said, that's garbage. Women deserve the same equal opportunities. And how do you achieve that? Well, there's a couple other big flaws. Women are not guaranteed equal rights under the 14th Amendment. And the Civil Rights Act of 64 might have said no discrimination based upon sex. But as we all know, I just mentioned the Clean Water Act, laws can be thrown out. The Voting Rights Act has been basically thrown out. Why can't? And I should add the Griswold decision about privacy rights is winding its way to the Supreme Court right now, and that might be thrown out. I don't think so, but I didn't think the Voting Rights Act would be thrown out. So the big issue they have is the fact that women, because they do not have control over their own economic, social, reproductive rights, they need to be elements of to get out independence of men. Because if they have no ability to make a higher living or career, they have no choice but to get married, and then they're stuck. They are dependent. And they would make it very clear, nothing wrong getting married. It's the fact that it'd be married almost by economic coercion. That's why they would emphasize education and rights in the workplace. The most important issue for the feminist movement, though, would be family planning, reproductive rights, when to have a child. And this is such a big deal. There's been so many economic studies on this. This is one from the University of Michigan, and in 2012, I think it's a pretty good study. There's always a couple little things here and there, but every study has the same basic element. I chose this one because the graph is easy to see. That's thinking ahead. What happens to economically to women when they have children? Let's be clear. What happens to their earnings? So here is women's earnings on the baseline. And then what happens with that? It drops by about a third on average for every woman when they have a child, regardless if they're married or not. And that's the economic issue. If they can't plan that, that's a big hit to the family to lose a third of the earnings. It's a huge hit. No, thank you, but I appreciate it. You guys made lemon bars? Oh, thank you.
No,
Culinary arts made lemon bars. I feel sorry for the culinary arts. I think I'd move out of there a little bit like you think. Moving out of that and all that stuff. Mine's relatively easy. Those people, that's gonna be tough. So, family planning. So if you can't decide when, that's a big hit. And don't forget, since the Industrial Revolution, we have the wage system. So families are not not self-sufficient. They have to have a wage. So we are living in that world. Oh, one more thing. As long as there have been human beings, they've worried about when they have children. Nomadic tribes cannot have a lot of kids because they move all the time. People have always worried about that. So the birth control bill would probably be the most important single issue for women's rights. Margaret Sanger, who started Planned Parenthood, had been working on that for 50 years. She had a few eugenics issues, so everyone's inconsistent in some ways. But moving on, here you can decide how many children you want. The idea is you can plan this. And that would be such a big deal. Because if you can plan when you have children and know when the economic hits, there's a better chance for, please have the right word here. Oh, don't forget Griswold versus Connecticut would allow that for privacy rights. And that would be a measure of independence that women simply did not have. So, and I should add, if women are independent and therefore can decide when they have children, they can bargain for higher wages. If they can bargain for higher wages, that actually will boost wages for men too. This is just pure economics. So I'm just talking about the issue of family planning. And I can't help it. My mind always goes to economics. I can't help it. So another big issue would be Title IX, no discrimination in education. And it was the norm that women were not allowed, young women or kids, girls were not allowed in elementary, especially high school, to take advanced classes or honors classes. In college, they were expected to get, go to college, get married, and the majors would be very much for, that could be only for women. And there are, of course, no extracurricular activities for girls in high school, women in college, except for music, which is great, but that was one choice, or maybe like cheerleading. Nothing wrong with that. Perfectly good. The point is, that's not many options, not many choices. And this would be huge. They said schools can no longer discriminate. It would take years for it to finally happen. No longer discriminate against women taking more advanced classes. Hey, women were not allowed in these classes in high school. It just didn't happen. And the first women's sports would come about. In a review session, I did mention I watched the very first girls basketball game at Custer County High School, Miles City High School in 1972. And I still vividly remember it because it was the slowest thing I've ever seen in my life. It was half court and a jump ball after every made basket. If you think about basketball, you can understand how slow the game was. I think it was like 6-4 was the final score. And it took some time, but clearly women are great basketball players. But it took a while. Oh, one more story I'll tell you about this. It wasn't that long ago, still, that women were not allowed into honors classes. And I can still remember when I was a sophomore in high school, I was sitting in biology class. And biology, just like everyone had to take. But then the next classes were on, science classes in Miles City. were honors. So we had honors chemistry, honors physics, and that was just for boys. And I remember sitting next to this girl, a friend of mine, brilliant. She was brilliant. And the counselor was in class, kind of going over, just things haven't really changed. We just did it differently then. Counselor's talking about next year's options. She raised her hand. She said, I'm going to go to med school. And I want to know what classes I should take next year. And I'll never forget, he and this old guy, probably younger than me now, but seemed very old at the time, kind of goes, no. You can't. That's not, you're not going to med school. No, well, there'll be other classes. Have you thought about it? And he literally said home economics. He said home ec. And I could feel the fury of her. I should say, that's not that long ago. I was alive. I was in high school. I was 16. And she is a doctor in Seattle. She's brilliant. She was so smart. But that, she was going to be denied that and never got the opportunity. That's not that long ago. And what's amazing that happened is the number of women outpacing men now in college is actually shocking. And the number is going up even more as now men are dropping the number that are going to college. But a lot of that has to do not so much with rising, more as how incredibly expensive college is. Which, I'm sorry, it's probably not going to get better. It's not going to get better. At least for a while. So, while this is going on, the war was still going on. And even though Nixon had talked about peace with honor, there's still 500,000 troops in Vietnam. The biggest anti-war protest in American history up to that time, there'd be a bigger one in 2003 against the Iraq War, would take place on November 11th, 1969. Millions marched. And Nixon lost his mind because he saw this as undermining his presidency. He barely won. The Democrats still have huge majorities in the House and the Senate and governorships. And he could see it all falling apart, him being a one-term president. He freaked out. And he did everything he could to try to make the anti-war protesters into anti-American and not real Americans who were stabbing Americans in the back. Remember I used the term stab in the back after World War I? They used the same terms against the anti-war movement. And so he did have one advantage. Vietnamization was turning the war over to the South Vietnamese. So the U.S. can begin to withdraw troops. And by 72, most U.S. troops were out. This would never have worked if not for the fact that Tet was such a horrible defeat for the Viet Cong that it gave breathing space. We are South Vietnamese troops. U.S. troops pulled out, that means the draft can drop. If the draft can drop in numbers, that means less people will protest the war. It was a very clever move. Also, the draft was incredibly unfair. Incredibly. The draft changed to a lottery. Now, Nixon did not sign the bill, but he was president when it changed. The draft boards were unfair. As I mentioned, you go to college or whatever to avoid it. It went to a lottery where they put every birthday right here, and they literally pulled out twice a year. They pulled out, and the lower your number in your birthday, I think it was like September 17th, 1951 and 69. Is that number? The first one, you're one. The lower your number, the better chance you're drafted. So if you got a high number, you're out. And since it seemed less politically connected or financially connected to the draft, opposition could begin to drop. And they had this, and they would broadcast it on local television stations. And you can imagine all the 18 and 19-year-old men would be watching the TV. So a friend of mine was in college. He was at University of Montana. He was 19 years old, and he remembers a TV lounge in Murray Hall, packed to the gills with all these guys watching the TV. And when they pulled the first number out, because they got rid of the college exemption. So they would go if they're drafted. They pulled the number out and he read the birthday. And up front, very quietly, he heard, yeah, the guy got one. He joined the Air Force. He didn't want to go to the Army or the Marines and be in combat. Air Force, it would a better chance he might go to West Germany. So that's what he joined. So But then in 1970, 69, 70, Cambodia. Nixon seemed to escalate the war. Now, I don't know why I put Vietnamization. The US, but the US was beginning to pull troops out. But then 69, the US began secretly bombing Canada, Cambodia, and then 70, US and South Vietnamese forces invaded. It was a limited invasion. Here's Nixon talking about it. Just to knock out Viet Cong supply bases. But people all over the United States thought, is this an escalation? Is the war going to get bigger? Are they going to increase the draft? Are they going to send more troops? Was Nixon lying the whole time? And this is going to trigger the biggest anti-war protest, I'm sorry, the most violent anti-war protest of the entire war. And soon people started calling it Nixon's war, when Nixon was not president, but now he's tied to it. And these would be huge. At the University of Montana, they start to burn down the ROTC building. And a friend of mine, the same guy I told you about, was at the protest, protesting it. All of a sudden he saw firebombs going into the, and he did one of these, what's it like in my dorm right now? Yeah. The Khmer Rouge was actually just beginning to fight an insurgency against the neutral government in Cambodia. But that's a good point, because what's going to happen is this invasion will help the Khmer Rouge take over. And that will lead to a mass genocide. So the United States, this invasion will lead to genocide. Nixon, but huge protests. Oh, I should add, I didn't tell you about the anti-war moratorium. I was in the anti-war moratorium. I marched. I didn't actually march. Most of the time, as I understand it, I was carried. True though, I was in my 40s, and back, I was carried. No, that's true though. It was in Billings. I was carried. Most of it. I walked a little bit. I don't remember any of it. So, but I do know for a fact I was. So, Kent State would be the most famous of these protests. After the protests had died down by the 4th, but untrained, terrified National Guardsmen saw students walking across the campus. They finally, they shut down classes for 4 days, opened up classes again. They saw them, panicked, and opened fire. Just opened fire. Wounding over 20, killing 4 students. This is the most famous picture. She didn't know him. She was actually just turned 16. She was a runner. She just happened to be on her way to California. Just happened to be there. She was running away from home. That's sad. But that picture, I didn't think it was just, I shot right in front of me. And Jackson State, 11 protesters were killed. Everyone talked about Kent State though, because Jackson State was an all-black school. But you're going to have this big cry, and Hawks are going to start saying, you should have shot them all. And it's going to really show the divide of the anti-war movement. And 4 days later, in response to what happened at Kent State and Jackson State, a pro-war protest called the Hard Hat Riots would happen. And this would show this conservative backlash against these hippies, doves, stabbing us in the back. And I've had people tell me that it was the anti-war movement that were traitors that lost the war. I'm pretty sure there were a lot of Vietnamese that had something to do with this. But anyways, and Nixon took advantage of this and called them the great silent majority, hardworking Americans who aren't protesting. So here are the hard hat riots. These are working class people. They wearing hard hats and they're carrying lead pipes or wrenches and waded into the anti-war protest and beat the hell out of them, as you can see right here. And the police sat back and did nothing. Nixon taking advantage of that. That's at the 72 Republican Convention. So the great silent majority, hard-working people. And this would be part of this conservative revival of the 70s. Now, most of the people who became more conservative were about these cultural issues. Who's a real American? Hawks, doves, anti or pro-civil rights, anti or pro-women's rights. But this would bring back conservative economics with which we are still very conservative economic. Here's at the convention, the hard hats. Working class people were Democrats. They were cutting off working class people because of this issue. Also, a lessening of tensions in the Cold War called détente. I know what a lot of you are thinking, and now I finally did it. You wanted to see Leonid Brezhnev, the premier of the Soviet Union, in a bathing suit. Now you see it. And there's one more thing. You ever see that picture? You can't unsee it. It is now seared. An image of that into your brain. It's like looking into the sun. Okay, I just thought that picture was hilarious. I wonder if you could pull the shorts up any higher, but there's going to be arms limitations talk called SALT, and conservatives are actually furious. And this will be part of the late 70s idea that the Soviets are winning the Cold War. We got to get tougher on communism. Here's Leonid Brezhnev and jumped into a Cadillac at Camp David, the presidential retreat in Maryland, and Nixon climbed in with him, and he took off at 100 miles per hour along a windy road and nearly drove off the edge of the road 4 different times and killed them both. That would have been an interesting way to end the peace talks. No one else is in the car. Brezhnev said, "Come ride with me," and he took off. That's him. One cameraman got that picture. Nixon also opened up relations with the People's Republic of China. Isn't that curious? President Trump just had a summit in the People's Republic of China, but Nixon actually went to China and met with the leader of China, Mao Zedong, his national security advisor, soon to be Secretary of State, Kissinger, and they did this in top secret. And here's the thing: the rabid anti-communist Nixon got détente. The rabid anti-communist opened up relations with China. But I should have, remember Truman Doctrine that thought was every communist was the same? Well, in 69 and 71, there were two pitched battles on the Manchurian-Siberian border between Soviet and Chinese forces. Over 10,000 soldiers were killed. And you can imagine thinking, wait a second, if they're killing thousands of each other, maybe they're not buddies. And they realized that the Truman Doctrine was not exactly correct. And in 1979, I didn't put this down, so I put 79, the US formally recognized the People's Republic of China. China. Thus, now the issue with Taiwan. So the election of 72, Nixon is appearing like the war is winding down. Nixon, the troops are being pulled back. There were peace talks and détente. He looks like he's in good shape. The Democrats had changed the way they picked their presidents to the way it is now. A lot of more established Democrats dropped out of the race, and George McGovern, who was a very anti-war, liberal, economically liberal senator from South Dakota, got the nomination. And he turned out to be an inept candidate. And Nixon's dirty tricks were to paint him as wanting, because there was talk about legalizing marijuana, he's going to give all the kids acid, for example, which no, not at all. They painted him as this flower child, anti-American, anti-traditional values Democrat, which is so weird. He was a war hero who flew 24 missions, pilot of a B-24 heavy bomber over Germany. He won the Distinguished Flying Cross. And yet, he's being painted as anti-war, anti-American, or anti-American. And he had terrible picks for vice president. He wasn't a good campaigner. In the conservative revival in 1980, he loses a seat in South Dakota. He moved to Whitefish. He passed away about almost 20 years ago. But I met him. And he's really nice, good man. He's just shocking. But that has nothing to do with your good candidate. He was a horrible candidate. And the Nixon campaign, Nixon wanted full victory. And to portray him now as being radical, too radical, liberal, too radical anti-war. But that's going to lead to Watergate. Nixon's campaign, it was called the Committee, I don't have a picture of it, Committee to Re-elect the President, or Committee to Re-elect the President, get it? Read. They were filled with cutthroats and hooligans. It's actually kind of amazing how many disgraced FBI and CIA agents Nixon had working for him. And they did dirty tricks all over. For example, when Senator Edwin Muskie of Maine, his wife passed away, it looked like he was going to get the nomination. And he went to a therapist because he was having a difficult time with this. Nixon's people broke into the therapist's office, stole the information, and then brought out that Muskie was crazy. And it just scuttled this campaign. It's just unbelievable dirty tricks. But the most famous, to break in to the Democratic National Committee headquarters in the shockingly ugly Watergate Hotel / office space, and bug the phones trying to get dirt on Democrats. Basically, they believe that they were setting up Democrats, prominent male Democrats coming into Washington, D.C. with prostitutes from the DNC headquarters. Were they? You never know. But they're hoping to get dirt. The criminals were so inept, it's hard to put into terms. They're all ex-CIA guys. They got busted by a security guard. They got caught, and they were caught not only with documents from Creed, but two of them had checks from the committee to re-elect the president. And you would think this would destroy them. So they had ties to Creed. But it didn't help McGovern. Nixon claimed that it was some rogue agents, and for national security, he stopped the investigation, even though we didn't know that at the time. And so it didn't help McGovern. McGovern, his campaign spiraled into a disaster. And even though Democrats still swept the House and the Senate, Nixon won. Now this time, the Republicans are red. One of the biggest victories in American history. And it's really fascinating because Democrats just swept the House and the Senate. They actually gained seats, yet Nixon won a huge victory. You might notice that for the first time, District of Columbia had a vote in the presidential election. That's it. McGovern lost his home state. 4 years, remember just 8 years earlier, LBJ won a victory even bigger in popular vote. That's how crazy the country was. Well, there were Paris peace talks. There were negotiations. And even though one peace talk, the first effort was scuttled right before the election, they finally came up with an agreement. But the peace talks were kind of a farce. For nearly a year, the peace talks did not even happen because they argued about what kind of table they would sit at. The North Vietnamese and Viet Cong wanted a square table. The United States and South Vietnam wanted a rectangular table. And so they talked about nothing but table issues for nearly a year. Anybody know what they decided upon? An oval. When they finally did, and the talks went nowhere, but Henry Kissinger secretly negotiated a peace agreement with the North Vietnamese, icing both the Viet Cong and the South Vietnamese out. And what happened? January 73, the peace accords were signed. American prisoners of war in North Vietnam were released, and the U.S. pulled troops out. North Vietnam did not pull their troops out of South Vietnam. South Vietnam, it looked like peace, but it wasn't peace. It was an illusion. As the Viet Cong and North Vietnamese began to build up, they began an offensive in 74, and in 75, South Vietnam, the capital fell like that. It happened so fast, it's unbelievable. I should have President Tu left with hundreds of millions of dollars of U.S. aid in Saigon for his personal gain, and build a big mansion in California. He died in California. Similar thing's going to happen in Afghanistan. The U.S. announced them leaving. They took out hundreds of millions of dollars of U.S. aid, just disappeared. Their government collapsed when they realized the president left. But Watergate came back in. Last thing we did. Watergate, everyone thought they died. But then a couple reporters from the Washington Post, there's a great movie, a book and movie that's called All the President's Men. But they found out that Nixon was secretly taping the White House. Why? Oval Office compensation. Why? To get dirt on people, for the record. And now for the next 2 years was a fight about the tapes. And on that happy note, I'll finish where we're at here tomorrow, quickly go to the 70s into the 80s and then the 90s. Wow, this is amazing. We are almost done. I will tell you LBJ stories. The video tomorrow, so there's questions to go around with it, just, just a phrase, that's all I want, right? Phrase, we're good with that. The last one, you have to give your own personal opinion. The movie should take about, it's an hour-long thing, should take 42 minutes. And on that happy note, Tuesday, books. We're turning in the books. Bring your books. Goodbye, everybody. You know, I probably should have taken one of those lemon bars. I'm kind of hungry. Yeah.
Regarding the test next week.
Oh, yeah, you're skipping out. I forgot about you. When do you leave out? This Saturday?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. Hey, when do you? Yeah. I'll record everything. You up to do it.
Ready?
The problem is after your vacation for a week. Oh, you're gonna be there for a full week?
Mm-hmm.
So are you flying into Dublin?
Yeah.
And then you know what you're gonna do after that?
Down, I think might go to Galway.
I've not been to Galway or
There's
Galway.
like a national park that we might
That would be awesome. Have
have
fun.
recommendations.
Huh?
Give you recommendations.
I have one recommendation. Ireland is great, and there's a couple walking tours, the history of Ireland, but there was the Easter 1916 Rebellion walking tour,
Okay.
and it was one of the best things I've ever done.
All right.
The guide was great. He was funny. He was interesting. And once he found out I was from Montana, he goes, "Oh, beaut!" and started talking. And with Ireland, he knew about the Thomas Francis Meagher statue because
Oh, yeah.
Thomas Francis Meagher was a big part of the Irish independence. He was so excited. I'm not kidding. It was awesome.
Okay.
Yeah, cool. I know there's 1,000 things you got to do, but if you get a chance, I highly recommend it.
So lonely with all you guys gone for.
Can I get the paper for tomorrow?
There's
Yes.
people. There's only this road. It's like
I'm looking over
no
here
road,
because
I get
in the
it.
middle of us talking about Nixon, that I said that Reagan came after Lyndon B. Johnson and Michael Lee too, so don't feel too great about that.
Did you put Reagan after Johnson?
Devin Spear just as
Huh?
much as me.
He was after Johnson.
I still want to speak for Nixon when I told myself that I didn't because I just anything.
Have other people in there. It's a timed essay, and there's lots of, if you have back information, and if you have Johnson, you have other, if you have Reagan in there.
You should figure out right. Do something.
Obviously, whoever's reading will decide, but I think it should be fun, because the essay was so broad, you can't put everybody.
It just came from art and just gives for you. Three-headed flamingo.
How?
Well, no, it came like
It came like that?
definitely. Yeah.
I'm putting it right next to mine. Let's start a call. Huh? That is so nice of her. Yeah, she's cool. What can I say?
Didn't already?
Yeah.
Oh, that's thing. It's.
And then there's this.
Oh. For the highlight of the ones that we were. Yeah, it's. Dang it. Thanks.
No, they were four. But you watched it.
I did it.
Okay, why are you skipping this class?
I'm skipping.
I really feel you. It's turning into another process of like this. And it's just funny.
Yeah. It's
Like, why did this classes?
I wasn't even there yesterday at all. Oh.
Yeah.
I was just trying.
We're good?
I saw.
Yeah. If everything, yeah.
So,
Yes.
See that?
These two.
No, let's just say that. No,
Okay, just remind me. What are you doing again? Oh, yeah, I remember that box, yeah.
For the, for the non, are we taking the today?
Yeah.
Or like boats.
So. So. It's like experience there. It was. So I read how. I didn't want to. First of all, Mr. Let's get one reason is that so we. No, but like this entire thing. Oh, just the best. Just put one photo. What's in there? What's in there? Please join Callahan's congratulations.
That's your best bet.
Let's go take your notes. There'll be a couple things we're gonna talk about.
outside.
The Watergate scandal. That was Richard Nixon. When he tapped the Democratic headquarters to hear their plan. And then he resigned before he got it inaugurated. Exactly. Nixon. I was gonna say Dixieland is Nixonland.
Nixon land.
I don't think that's one.
I'm just betrayed.
Bro, yesterday was going here. We watched the thing on the JFK assassination.
But yeah, then like.
No, there was 3 other kids. It was all this room. Besides that. And someone passed that though.
Oh my god.
Yeah, we had the option to do like a music thing, like music on like the 60s, 70s, 80s, something, and then there was like the James K assassination, and then Mythbusters. And we chose JFK assassination. But it looked a little more fun than I thought it was. The thing was, it's like those old documentaries you watch. It was like that. I thought it would have been a little cooler.
Possibly a brace on and Megan was there that I think the right good at it.
That's what I'm.
Yeah, being directed. My sister told me that my sister told me that she was I think because of like that. It's can be a bad direction, not a woman's. And then it's and strong. It's okay. It's too good.
Kevin been in town.
She's been like, no, resurrect. He's like, she's good. She's not been around. Sorry. No, but Danny or Lenny's not. Yeah. Actually, do bear a chance. He's he's there. He's getting like the shot as he pushes. Yeah. I I'm thinking finding Uncle said.
Oh, for sure. Let's go ahead.
Dead.
Yeah.
Late.